I have a view that will be incredibly unpopular, but it's my podcast, so I get to share them.
It's the Feeney files, mate.
Let me finish the point, though. Let me finish the point.
I'm trying to save you.
I know. The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes every week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to join the Patreon community of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Wednesday morning on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. This is our emergency Socially Democratic episode. I got messages from a whole bunch of you out there saying, when are you doing a pod? The original plan was that this Friday's episode was going to be our recording of the live recording of the Feeney Files with Jesse McCrum, which we taped last Friday at the ALP National Conference in Adelaide. I'm going to let our producer decide this, but I think that's still going to drop on Friday. But because of the events that happened on Monday and Tuesday on Spring Street here in Melbourne, we have decided to jump on our microphones and do a quick post-coup debrief. And to help me unpack that are two people who are familiar with a lot of these goings-ons. My first guest is a voice you know quite regularly, former Victorian State Secretary, MP and Senator, and someone who has been close to a number of these leadership changes over the years, and a man that I literally was only having a curry with on Rundle Street on Saturday night. Who knew we'd be back on the show so quickly? David Feeney, welcome back.
A pleasure to be back. Thank you very much.
And our other guest is someone you also know because she was the Chief of Staff to the all-conquering Daniel Andrews government, and is on our monthly mailbag episodes, and is now a managing partner at FMRS Advisory. Lissie Ratcliff, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm pleased to be part of this hybrid episode.
You're welcome. David, you and I were in Adelaide last weekend for the triennial gathering of the clans.
Yes.
Did you get a sense, as I did, that certainly the anti-Allan forces were gunning for something to happen this week? Whether it was going to happen or not, I wasn't sure. But certainly they were making it clear that they wanted to bring something on. Did you get that sense when you were in Adelaide?
Yeah, I did. I probably wouldn't characterise it like that, though. I would say I just had a sense that the sort of despair in the State Parliamentary Labor Party was deepening, and that was driving a mood for change. We have seen sort of Jacinta Allan's leadership as Premier buffeted from time to time by leadership speculation, but she has seen that off on a few occasions. And I would say that the kind of loyalty gene inside the State Parliamentary Labor Party is very strong. They were not inclined to bump the leader. It's not the sort of political culture of that group. But they were kind of, as a majority of them were getting closer and closer to that place because of the continuing failure of the state government to find clean air and talk about things other than the issues that were buffeting it, and despair at the polls and how as the election gets closer, the State Parliamentary Labor Party were staring their futures, or lack of it, in the eye.
Lissie, did you, when we started to see media reports, we've seen media reports previously that there was rumblings and there was a potential challenge going to happen, as David alluded to in the past. Did you think that this was going to be another one of those kind of, not boyhood cried wolf kind of situations, but something that, people would talk about but would never eventuate, but obviously it did?
Yeah, it did. And look, I think that with these things, as David said, Jacinta Allan as Premier did see off a number of these, mini insurgencies, if you like. And in the end, it is clear that there are a group of people, both within the caucus and outside the caucus, who decided that on this occasion they were not for turning. And so I think this had been for some time, a cause in search of a candidate, and in the end they got their candidate, and then they decided to pull the trigger. So I think there's obviously scenarios in which things might have been different, but I think once the right decided that they were going to make this happen, and part of the left decided that they were going to go with them on that, that was it.
Before we break it down, for our listeners that may be outside of Victoria that haven't been following this too closely, I'll just give you a very kind of short cliff notes of how it sort of transpired. This Monday morning, a delegation of cross-factional leaders from both the left and the right went to Premier Allan and told her that she had lost support of the caucus, and she pushed back and told them or asked those 6 ministers that they should resign. The same morning, she wrote to the State Secretary, Steve Stakos, formally declaring that she would be a candidate for the leadership and to prepare under the rules that there would be an open vote of both the caucus and of the party membership as per the rules. There was a cabinet meeting that followed after that mid-morning. Later that day, the delegation went to Ben Carroll and urged him to run. Ben Carroll then announced his candidacy, saying that the stakes at the upcoming election are simply too high. Late afternoon, The Age published a story of a leaked cabinet brief that had warned the then Minister for Transport, Jacinta Allan, about CFMEU infiltration into infrastructure projects. Timing was impeccable. Then Tuesday morning, ahead of the scheduled caucus meeting, where there was expected to be a spill motion, Jacinta Allan called a press conference and announced her resignation as the leader of the Labor Party and as the Premier of Victoria. Then there was a caucus meeting that ran for nearly 2 hours, and there's been a lot of reports about how that unfolded. You can read about that in the media. Ben Carroll was endorsed as the leader, and Gabriel Williams was elected the deputy leader, beating in a ballot Steve Demopoulos 45-23. And on Tuesday afternoon, Ben Carroll was sworn in as Victoria's 50th Premier of the state at Government House and the first Centre Forum member to lead the state.
There's just one thing in that chronology that I think is worth adding, and that is at the very beginning on the Sunday night, there was a gathering of factional conveners left and right. And as listeners may know, Victoria is blessed with more factions than the average Labor Party. So, this meeting of faction conveners wasn't a meeting of 2 people or 3 people. It was best part of a dozen people. But their deliberations were obviously critical to greenlighting the rest of the events as you describe them. And I guess what struck me about that Sunday night meeting is all of the faction conveners, with only 1 or 2 exceptions, left, right, left wing, right wing and chicken wing, were all on board by that point.
I want to get, David, your reflections on how all that unfolded. I don't feel like it is much different to normally how these things operate, right? You're just trying to build momentum within the caucus. you're giving a certain amount of information to journalists so you can build even more momentum, put pressure on your opponent. It seemed to go reasonably well, I would think, is there anything that when you're observing it as an outsider looking in that there was things that surprised you or jumped out at you? I'll ask you questions in a minute about the ballot itself for deputy leader, but anything else in terms of the lead up to it?
Well, I guess, I think the profound issue for us as we contemplate what's transpired is we must contemplate the leadership of Jacinta Allan and why it unravelled in the way that it did. I mean, reflecting on this, I'm very saddened by the fact that Jacinta Allan's premiership ended in the way that it has. But it is just another reminder to me about how the person is so completely different to the person you see in the media and on your television sets. It's a truism, I think, that the people never get to know their politicians. They just get to know caricatures of them. And Jacinta lost control of her own caricature. And so why did she lose control of her own caricature? I would say because for the first 12 months of her leadership, it was very much a business as usual continuity leadership. And that's where she really needed to set down some markers about why she was different and what made her and her premiership important. And that did not happen. You only get one chance to make a first impression, and her first impression on voters, in the early moments of her leadership, was not. Did not reflect the fact that she'd come to that job with a political strategy. That would be my take on it. And then obviously over the course of the 2 years, we saw issues get away from her, and she was just undone by fate, wasn't she? I mean, Daniel Andrews had given her the big build and big construction portfolios because they were fun, they were exciting, they were at the heart of the political debate, and they looked like they were going to be a wonderful political ornament for the rest of her career. Unbeknownst to everyone at the time, they turned out to be a death sentence because it inextricably linked her with the construction industry corruption saga, which just unrelentingly cast her and her government as being unable to manage an issue of great public importance. And then, of course, on top of that, we had crime and budget challenges. And all of this essentially meant that the canvas of our new and unknown Premier was painted by others rather than painted by her. As we started to sink in the polls, we heard the drumbeat for leadership change. And that drumbeat, was small and predictable at the outset, but as the fortunes of state Labor waned, that drumbeat grew greater. And ultimately, it reached a critical mass, and I think it reached a critical mass with the intensifying nature of the construction industry scandal. And you mentioned that article about the 2023 briefing note. And that perhaps was just a little taster of what the age had in mind for the state government over the next few months. That story wasn't going away. It was getting harder and getting worse. And I think ultimately a majority of the caucus, it looks to me a great majority of the caucus, decided that it was time for a new leader. So, as I say, I'm saddened by that story. A lot of it was, the fates intervening in an unhelpful way. But, Jacinta was master of her own destiny too. She became Premier with a thumping majority in 2.5, 3 years of runway ahead of her, and sadly did not get her strategic thinking in order in time.
Lissie, opening salvo there from David on that. And I wanted to pick up one of the points that David just talked there about setting an agenda to the public and how when Jacinta Allan became Premier, how she conveyed what her government was going to look like to the public. And David sort of said it's going to be sort of this business as usual operation. And at the time, I'll admit, I thought to myself, well, the government has proven since 2014 all the way through that this operation has worked well. And I don't know whether you sort of want to talk about I got a sense that internally the way the government operated actually did change, in that it became a lot more kind of let a thousand flowers bloom. It became less centralised. It gave ministers an opportunity to express themselves and come up with ideas and change the way that public policy left. I think that was so. I mean, I'd put it to both of you that perhaps it's not just Jacinta Allan that is. I don't want to just say the word responsible, but we got to here not just because of Jacinta Allan's leadership, but because of the entire cabinet as well, because they were all a part of this journey, because that's where things did change compared to when you were working in government for the previous Premier.
Yeah, look, I think that's a fair comment, Stephen, and I think that the Andrews government was much commentated about for its command and control structure. I absolutely agree. We were a highly disciplined government, and that involved a degree of centralisation in terms of the direction of strategy and whatnot, which is, I think, self-evidently had been very effective. There was a very clear view, I think, amongst the cabinet and the caucus at the end of Daniel's premiership that they wanted something different, and that is what they asked for, and that is what Jacinta Allan delivered to them. She did run a more sort of collaborative, if you like, is the word I think some people have used, like a process where a cabinet government where ministers were given more freedom. And I would say, though, having been given that opportunity, I would agree with you, Stephen, there is a collective responsibility, and that the trade-off for having greater freedom is that you have a greater accountability to solve problems for yourself and come up with both policy and political solutions for the challenges that confront the government on any given day. So you want a more cabinet-focused so-called government. Well, that is what they got. And so, yeah, I think everybody should perhaps reflect on that a little. I also think, though, there is a tendency at the end of any period of government, whether that's because of an election loss or because of a leadership change, to declare that everything that happened was bad because of the result. And I think that would be a great shame if the record is allowed to be set that way, because I think Jacinta Allan delivered a lot of change for this state, and I think a lot of it was important, and I think a lot of it will rightly endure. I think housing supply and affordability is one of her great legacies that will be incredibly important. She did a lot of and to be clear, this is her legacy that we're talking about here. She delivered a lot of policy changes that mean Melbourne is the cheapest capital city in the mainland to buy a house right now, and that is an extraordinary achievement for a state government in a country that is going through an unbelievable housing crisis right now. Women's health is something she called out in her speech yesterday. She deserves enormous credit for driving that agenda as well. Work from home, which a lot of people hate, but it is very clearly supported by the electorate, also hers. There are other things as well, and I think infrastructure, despite, David, yes, your assessment of the big build now obviously having many detractors, but I think it is also worth noting that the last two changes of government in this state were not entirely, but at least partly driven by an electorate that was sick and tired of a government, in one case on our side and the other case on the Liberal Party's side, not building enough infrastructure. This government was elected to correct that mistake and has set about doing that comprehensively. And both the premiers who have, prior to yesterday, served in that government have been a big part of delivering that agenda.
Yeah, I think I always think power is like mercury. It settles where it settles. And the reason that Premier Andrews and the Labor government of that era was capable of great centralisation is because Daniel Andrews was able to harness a remarkable level of power and authority unto himself. And he was able to do that because he was winning elections and governing well. They were the two ingredients to his success. And as his power and authority grew through that success, he was able to centralise government. I think it's wrong-headed to think that centralisation was gifted to him. It was taken, and it was taken by him because that was in his judgment, and I dare say, if you look at the scoreboard, history's judgment, that was the most effective way for him to run that government and deliver the things he wanted to deliver. That model was not going to work for his successor, because his successor inevitably, no matter who it was not going to begin their journey with that level of power and authority. So I don't think it's fair to say that Jacinta sort of came into office as Premier and bequeathed some consensualist model on the system. I think she was ultimately obliged to have a more consensualist and collaborative model in terms of how she ran her government, because cabinet, and the various people who populate it felt like, Daniel's gone. Now we can have a bit more freedom and we can let our change agenda roll. And a new premier did not yet have the power and authority to constrain that in the way that her predecessor did. So I see that as completely natural, and the ebb and flow of power between the centre and the ministerial offices, that is part of a government's life, rather than a question of strategic choice.
No, sure, but I do think, David, that, and I agree with that, but I do think, though, that does mean that ministers have had, for the last few years, a greater ability to set their own direction and make their own destiny. And I think the thing that I think people ought maybe reflect on is, when given that opportunity, and I think the answer will be different across the cabinet, but of course, what did they do with it?
As always, David White used to say to me when I was a young whippersnapper, in any Labor cabinet, there are 6 who are swimming, 6 who are treading water, and 6 who are drowning. That's just how a cabinet is, and I expect that'll be the verdict every time.
It's a much smaller cabinet than they've got these days, I think.
Yes, well, that's true. Yes, that's true. You made a point about legacy, and I don't want my hard-headed assessment to detract for a moment from Jacinta's legacy, which will, of course, be significant. I mean, obviously, yesterday was a difficult day for her and a day of disappointment for her supporters. But, as an ex-politician, I can say this. When you reflect over the longer term, what a remarkable career she's had, and how blessed has she been. I mean, entered the parliament at age 24, winning a marginal regional seat off the Liberal Party, a long career on the front bench at the heart of government, and ultimately rising to the job of Premier itself. So, she has an awful lot to be proud of. And, the political careers usually end in some sort of disappointment or bloodshed. Not many people get to choose their own moment of exit. A blessed few do. Jacinta, like the majority of us, didn't, but an enormously wonderful record for her to reflect on as she goes home to be with her husband and her children. And
a great advocate and hard worker for her own electorate as well. As someone born and raised in West Gippsland, when I ever travel across the city and head out to the west and go to cities like Ballarat and Bendigo, in particular Bendigo, the streets there are paved in gold. Their hospital looks like the Death Star. It looks amazing. There's just Bendigo's a great town, and a lot of it is down to the hard work of their local MP, who has been their local MP since 1999.
It's a quarter of a century of investment, isn't it?
Yeah, and relentless advocacy for her hometown, and as she should.
Yeah. I was watching, I don't know if anyone saw the ABC package that they did last night that sort of covered her history from when she first. Did you see when she was?
It was fun to watch her again. I remember her in 1999, but now my old eyes look back on that footage and, gosh, how young does she and indeed everybody else seem? It's amazing.
When she was being sworn in at Government House the first time as a minister, and she looks across to someone and goes, "Do I?" She mouths, "Do I stand up?" And I just cackled laughing because I went, "That's Jacinta," you know. There's an inherent country girl dag that is the heart of that person, and I just thought it was such an honest moment that we often, to your point before you said, David, you know, in politics we often miss these things, right? Because we have to present ourselves. Well, not we, I'm not a politician, but politicians have to present themselves in a certain way. But the Jacinta, you know, is that kind of do I stand up? Anyway, I just thought
that's right, and you know, and that charm and good humour was not conveyed to the electorate through the prism of television. I used to say the same thing about John Brumby. So it is a curse that some politicians who are, you know, utterly charming and intelligent, interesting, vivacious folk just don't come across that way in the political circumstances they're in.
Lissie, what did you make of her speech? It's so. I mean, I know we say this so often in politics, and it's not just here in Australia, but like we just heard Keir Starmer's resignation speech and everyone's going, "Oh, finally, a good speech from him," you know.
We had the same phenomenon with Kim Beazley, you might remember.
Yeah, you know, we should look into this. But I thought her speech was it was a fantastic speech. She spoke from the heart. But Lissie, I want to get your reflections on listening to her deliver her remarks yesterday morning under very, very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, I thought it was a cracker of a speech, genuinely a belter, and I also thought it was much better than Keir Starmer's. But I thought I thought she nailed it. It was she behaved impeccably. There was a lot of grace in it and a lot of class, and I thought she did a very nice job. One, outlining what she regards as the legacy of her, well, not only her premiership but her time in office, which, David, to your point, has been very very lengthy. I thought she did a nice job doing that. I thought the references to her mum and dad were great, and the way she talked about her personal story, particularly around women's health and endometriosis, and why that's been something that she's proud of, I thought were brilliant. I think it was a classy speech, and like, she is a classy person, so that should be a surprise to none of us. And I'm glad she got to, as her final sort of act in public discourse, at least for the time being, lay it out on her own terms in that way. She was entitled to that, and I'm glad she got to do it. I do think, Stephen, it is, you know, you do often see politicians, their last speech often is one of their very best. And I think, you know, inevitably it's the last thing they're doing. Like, there's nothing they have to worry about anymore at that point. It's not going to be the next press conference. The burden of state has come off them. And so there is a certain degree of, I am going to assume now, having watched a few people go through this, there is a degree of relief and freedom in it that you cannot possibly otherwise experience while you are still, you know, bound by your duties.
Absolutely right. I think it's also worth noting, maybe I'm jumping ahead of your agenda here, Stephen, but she also absolutely did the right thing resigning in the way that she did, rather than putting the party through a ballot. So I think, you know, underpinning her performance were some tactical considerations where she had, you know, I mean, the realpolitik was she didn't have the numbers, but she made sure that her exit was as organisationally as graceful as possible too, so that her successor could, have the coronation he needed and get cracking.
And strategically, her successor or those backing her successor wanted that as well. Like they didn't want this contest to be taken out of the caucus room, even though the rules allow that.
Sure.
And I have a view that will be incredibly unpopular, but it's my podcast, so I get to share them.
It's the Feeney Files, mate.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, you've taught me this a little bit, David, so maybe you're partly to blame, but I'm a fucking gloves off guy. Like, if we're going to go to war, we're going to go to war. Like, I'm not remember there's a good friend of yours and mine, David, we often refer to him as a peacetime conciliary. I'm not a peacetime conciliary. I'm a fucking wartime conciliary. Like, we go to the mattresses. And if it's in the rules that we can have a membership vote, then we're going to have a membership vote. And I would say to my opponents, you might have the numbers in this room, but let's test the numbers out there. And I know the counter argument, oh man, the government couldn't deal with that. That would be a complete disaster. Maybe. But maybe democracy isn't a bad thing for not just the 9,000 members of the Australian Labor Party who get to have a good look at our two candidates, but also the rest of Victoria as well. If it's good enough for the US political process where they effectively have primaries that then roll into the general, then it can be done in such a way with respect with each other that there is a contest. Because what do campaigns do? I've said this on the show a couple of times now. It brings focus. It brings focus to what you're actually about. I don't know how much more governing is left to be done in this government, to be honest. And I'm a campaign guy anyway, so I don't really care about the governing. Probably this is where my argument will fall down. But
I think so.
But I
No, I think you're being silly.
No, I know. I'm not, and I'm not saying that just from a just.
And I say that with love. You're being silly.
Yeah, let me finish the point, though. Let me finish the point.
I'm trying to save you.
I know, but by doing that, because then you can then just roll in to the campaign. Because I actually just think that the thing that will actually save
you roll into a catastrophe is what you're doing.
The thing that will save people aren't going to be paying attention. We all know that. How much research have we done about what people's knowledge is of what governments do every day? It's absolutely bare minimal. Like, we all think that they're paying attention to everything that goes on. They're not. They're just not, So I don't think it would be that much of a catastrophe. It would be, granted, it would be very, very interesting. But I'm just saying that it is in the rules. Either have it in the rules and use it, or just piss it off.
Yeah, well, piss it off, I think, would be my plan A, but I'm not here to argue for that. I think what you're saying is silly, and it's silly because what the Parliamentary Labor Party and its new leader are trying to do is seize the agenda and rescue the Labor Party from an impending defeat. That's what they're trying to do. And they're going to need all the time they can to present a new image and a new strategy and a new resolve to the Victorian people. And to bugger that up with a 6-week process of balloting branch members where the two leaders will parade around the state fighting with each other to the delight of the journalists who attend. And I went through this with Albo versus Shorten, where the two of them did have a rank and file ballot in the immediate aftermath of a defeat from opposition. So the circumstances utterly different. But nonetheless, the two of them ripped some skin off each other, and that was with us imposing Marquess of Queensberry rules. You take those away and you have just got a cannibal fest for the delight of the media on the eve of a state election, while the business of actually governing the joint falls to some interim premier, presumably it would have been Gabriel Williams. And what are the people of Victoria meant to make of the governing party at this point? We're worse than a schmozzle, open civil war. You're setting the scene, making a bad situation a catastrophe. That would have been a road to ruin, and mercifully Jacinta saw that with a clarity that you can't, and knew that if she went down that road, she would probably lose. I would say almost certainly lose, but perhaps more importantly, even if she won, would then arrive for the final straight in a deeply battered and bruised condition with the Labor Party wreckage all around her, her legacy would have been one of, fighting in the Führerbunker until the bitter end, despite the broader interests of people, party and state. It would have been a catastrophe. So she didn't choose that road. And that's excellent for her, that's excellent for the party, that's excellent for the state, and it's excellent for her successor. It was the right thing to do. That's not to take away from – it's blindingly obvious that was the right thing to do, but that doesn't detract from her generosity of spirit in making sure that's what happened.
And that's why I'll never get a job as a chief of staff. Okay, so let's talk. I want to quickly just get your reflections, David, on the vote itself, because there was some interesting things that happened, particularly with there wasn't a vote for the leader of the party, but I think there was although obviously was one for the deputy. It appears that the majority of the Socialist Left Caucus members voted for Steve Dimopoulos for the deputy position, and Gab Williams, who was the eventual winner of that vote, relied heavily on all of the votes from Labor Unity to get to the deputy spot. And the people have remarked that for the first time in a very, very, very long time, the right didn't split and the left were the ones who were splitting and the right were the kingmaker, even though they are a minority in that caucus. So I just want to get your reflections on that and how much of a realignment of the caucus it is anyway in terms of the factional operational balance within the party.
Yeah, well, I don't come to this conversation with much working knowledge of contemporary factional politics, so I don't know how much help I'm going to be to you. But yes, obviously the left did split on the question of deputy. Ben Carroll and Gabriel Williams are obviously a ticket, and the majority of caucus locked in to the ticket. A majority of that majority being MPs from the right wing of the party, but not all of them. What does this mean for the future? I don't think much because we have an election. It'll be a searing experience, and I think how this looks in the aftermath of an election will be everything. Is this the great gamble? Is this great gamble vindicated, or whatever? So that's my first thought. There will be some, I think, long-standing enmities that come out of this challenge. That, unfortunately, is always the way. I think the impact might be more particular for Gabriel Williams herself, and I don't have any great insight into what her or the factions are in which she moves. But I'd make this observation. I remember when Bill Shorten ran for leader and he had Tanya Plibersek locked in as his deputy candidate, and they were a ticket. And they marketed themselves to the party membership in that ballot as a package deal. And I can't emphasise enough the anger that existed in large parts of the left about the fact that Tanya had attached herself to the ticket in that way when Anthony Albanese was also running for leader. It was seen to be a betrayal, and I think that has... in the short term, Tanya became deputy leader of the Labor Party. I don't know if she was to reflect on it now, how she would think it's helped her in the long term. Will Gabriel Williams end up confronting something like that? Or alternatively, is she going to be able to say she made the hard and difficult choices that had to be made to give the Labor Party its best shot in November? Victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat is an orphan, and we don't yet know the answer.
I think I particularly agree with that last point, David. I think this is, a group of people, Ben Carroll included, have decided that they're going to bet the house on this. So they've torn down a premier and elected a new one, and that is the right of the caucus, and they have made a collective decision. With a whole lot of psychodrama and everything else in the kind of wings of all of that, but nonetheless, they have made a decision. They have changed the leader and changed the premier, and Ben Carroll is now the premier, and that will mean that he and the government and the party either win everything in November or they will lose everything in November. And we will not know the consequences of those decisions for another 130 odd days. But that's how long he's got to set the agenda and remake the government in his own image. And I've got no doubt that he will set about doing that with intent. But there is no doubt that the socialist left inside the parliamentary party is split. And I think David is correct that there will be some people, I'm sure, on both sides of that split who have long memories and very hard feelings about how that has unfolded. And my view is, and has always been, the leader deserves the support of their caucus, and the Premier deserves the support of their cabinet. Solidarity means something in the Labor Party. My view about that is not different today on Wednesday than it was on Monday. And everybody in that caucus is going to have to make their own decision about whether they continue some kind of cycle of violence. And we've seen the absolutely corrosive impact that has had on our federal party in Canberra and on the Liberal Party, both in Canberra and here in Victoria, when people decide that the cycle of violence must continue. But everybody will have their own individual choice to make about how they conduct themselves over the next 4 or so months. And parties that go into cycles of violence do not remain parties of government.
Well, I'm utterly committed to solidarity, but probably not so committed to the solidarity of the socialist left faction, if the truth be told. No, of course you're right. And I guess that takes us to perhaps, Ben Carroll now as leader and Premier. I said earlier you only have one chance to make a first impression, and yesterday, for most Victorians, he would have made his first impression. And I thought he handled the moment really, really well because it looked like some good thinking had gone into his opening remarks because the challenge that confronts him is significant, and I thought what he did was very elegantly set himself up as the change candidate, the candidate who is most able, best equipped to clean up the mess that most Victorians, or too many Victorians, think their state is in. And so it probably was some hard listening and some hard watching for those intimately connected with the ancien regime of Andrews and Allan. But I think that was the kind of reset he needed to make, and he did it. So it'll be fascinating now to see how this unfolds in coming weeks as he wrestles with the great big challenges. The great wrecking ball for Jacinta Allan's premiership and the great issue sitting at the heart of politics at the moment, for better or for worse, is the corruption in the construction industry. It has sucked the oxygen out of every other topic of conversation in our media, and even to some extent law and order and budget. So, the Labor government's got some mighty challenges, but I think its prospects with a strong reset. If Ben can establish himself as the hard man best placed to clean up the ship, why trust the clean-up to a fractured Liberal Party, an untested One Nation, a wretched Greens, when he is the best placed person to clean things up? We saw in Queensland this remarkable performance over the 90s where corruption inside Labor had to be tackled, and the only people who could tackle it were the Labor Party. And so the Premier kept being re-elected with ever greater margins so that he could have the mandate he needed to crush his own party. This trick has been done before. It's not a trick. It has to be done. It's important. But I think starting that road, setting that scene, Ben Carroll had a good day yesterday.
Lissie, I want to thanks, David, for segueing into the next topic, which I want to go anyway. But I actually want to, before we build on sort of the broader narrative that the new government's going to try and set with the electorate, internally setting up a new government isn't exactly an easy thing to do. He has like 21 more days than Kamala Harris did to try and get re-elected.
It's an ominous number to know.
Yeah, I know. But Lissie, you once said to me many years ago that setting up governments are like startups. It's not like as if like the very first government that began in wherever it was. It just is a continuous process, but you just keep on changing the people that are in the suits. It's the things behind the scenes that you don't really pay attention to, but actually are the engine room behind what makes government successful. So there's a lot of things that that the Premier has to get right and right quickly. I just want to give us a bit of given that this was your job, what does this look like for Ben Carroll going forward in the next couple of days or weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough. There's no doubt about it. Like, he's going to have to, effectively rebuild the plane while it is well and truly in the air, which was not, Jacinta Allan also had to do that, albeit, she had a much longer lead time to the election than he's going to have. But, yeah, the logistics of running the machine, they are incredibly, unbelievably difficult. There are, and this is true of anyone, until you've been in the centre, you can't possibly have visibility of all of the things it takes to have that machine function even competently, let alone well. And there are, whether from all of the staff, so for one thing, all of the staff in the Premier's office are all now going to have to decide whether they are willing to stay or whether they want to go.
The new Premier has some say in that as well.
No, of course. And the new Premier will have absolute say about, who he does and doesn't want to serve in his own office. But for a lot of staff, like, the reality is there is a national shortage of Labor staff right now because there are a lot of Labor governments. So it is going to be very difficult to, for combination of the Premier quite reasonably wanting his own people and change in there, and a whole bunch of other people saying, I'm incredibly tired, thank you, I'm going to go and have a good sleep. It's going to be incredibly hard to staff up that office this close to the election. That will be difficult. But even just, resetting and setting out your cabinet agenda and what do you want to get legislated before the end of the year, and all the HR nightmare that is unfolding today and will continue to unfold. There will have to be a reshuffle, obviously, because Jacinta Allan will need to be replaced in the cabinet. Obviously there needs to be a new education minister and so on and so forth. So that will trigger its own level of instability. I think, none of this is to say, get out the violins or anything, but the level of complexity and time resource that it takes to sort of reset that machine after whether it's a leadership change or an election. I didn't find restarting the government after our 2018 and 2022 election victories that much easier than setting it up from scratch in 2014. Even with all that continuity that we had, it is just brutally difficult, and that is going to be for the Premier and his senior staff, it's just going to be a really difficult job. So it is one I do not envy them, given the time that they have, because they also obviously need to get ready for the election. And party office, and both of you will know more about the details of this than me, but party office is going to have to pivot all of their stuff. So their research, their messaging, their materials, the lot is all going to have to pivot to a new leader. So yeah, there's just a lot of work to do. And to your point earlier, Stephen, there is the Parliament's still got a few sitting weeks to go this year. The Premier is going to have to, to David's point, if he is going to be the change candidate, then he is going to have to get his agenda up and through cabinet and out the door and communicate all of that. There is governing still to be done, and it is going to be. It's going to be a lot of hard work for them to make that happen.
Absolutely right. But let me be an optimist. In a perfect world, and I have no insight into what the new Premier's plans are, but in a perfect world, I think he should take the view that it's like bumping into the office as though you've just taken government. Like, he just needs to have fresh eyes on everything, and being so close to an election, will focus the mind of him, and you trust all of his staff about the fact that they really have only one mission, and that is to get themselves match fit for November. And anything that gets between them and that is a waste of energy. So I hope, the reshuffle I imagine will be very significant. The cabinet reshuffle. There was an architecture around the last cabinet that was particular, I think, to the Premiership of Jacinta Allan, and that will be recast. So the reshuffle will be fascinating, but populating, to your point, Lissie, populating those offices with staff of the calibre you need will be a big challenge. But hopefully, he's given that some thought, and he has an entourage that are up to the task. That will be crucial. But we don't know how the journey will unfold, but my look at it yesterday was the first steps were confident. Ben Carroll came to the podium with a message and a demeanour and a look that spoke to a political strategy, and that gave me hope.
It's I'm smiling to myself listening to the two of you talk about this, because your two political characters are at either, having known you both for a long time, are at either end of the spectrum. David is for the listeners out there, David is the kind of person you meet to discuss this stuff over a wine or a coffee and a cigarette at an outside venue, obviously, and David would have a jotter and would just sort of summarise the big picture, what this all needs to look like, and it all makes perfect sense on that bit of paper. Lissie is the person who has that, but also then goes down to the level of detail that needs to happen to do that. And and together, the two of you would actually make a wonderful team. But it's just funny, David going, yeah, that's a big thing. That someone needs to take care of that. Oh, that's a fucking huge thing. And I can see Lissie right now going, that's 2 solid weeks of getting no sleep and sorting that out right now.
Oh, mate, if
that's
it's
true. But I mean, Ben will hopefully
2 weeks. That will be a phenomenal achievement.
Yeah, that's true. Ben will hopefully have a kitchen cabinet. Every premier does, of people he trusts who are capable of managing the big portfolios, and he'll hopefully have, his selection of key staff and chief of staff in his own private office will be critical, and you got to get that right. And, we've seen premiers get that right and we've seen premiers get that wrong. We know how important a decision that is. So I don't mean to detract from the importance of the detail, but detail is nothing if all of your strategic settings are wrong. I think Ben starts with the right strategic settings.
What did you make, go to you first, Lissie, and then David, his opening sort of remarks, framing of what this key planks of this government's going to be is around integrity, community and safety and economics. I don't profess to suggest that this is the grid, but first of all, I like it in the sense that he's got clarity. Here are 3 things that I am going to be talking about, right? I like that, but I just want to get a sort of assessment from you about what does that say about what his tenure, certainly up until the election of governing, is going to look like.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be interesting, and that those are the initial priorities he's laid out. Whether they're his only ones, we'll have to wait and see what he sort of shares with the community over coming weeks. But I think there will have to be a decision that, like he and David, to your point, his senior team, both parliamentary and otherwise, make about what are the strategic focuses of his premiership and the new government now. I would probably suggest that there are going to have to be, one thing, does he genuinely believe that those are 3 issues on which he can beat the Liberal Party? That may be his view, I don't know. But if he does not think those are the things that on which he can beat the Liberal Party, then those are issues that he will try and neutralise, and he will need to set out an agenda in areas that he thinks he can beat the Liberal Party and One Nation for that matter. And what those are, we'll have to wait and see. But I think it is we're already seeing this, like a couple of the challenges he's going to face, absolutely inevitably, is that he will have, and already does have, every stakeholder interest group in the state of Victoria belting down his door, demanding that as part of this change that he is instigating, that part of that change must be whatever they regard as whatever was wrong with the government's agenda prior to today. And he and his ministers will need to make a very clear-eyed set of decisions about which of those do they adopt and which of those do they continue to resist, because it will be an overwhelming force. And I would probably just look back to history a little bit and remind our colleagues and comrades that in 2010 we had the endorsement, the Brumby government, of every stakeholder in town, and we did not win that election. So stakeholder, endorsement is not enough. So the Premier will need to make decisions about which of those he seeks to adopt. The other thing he's going to have absolutely coming at him like a gale force wind is the media doing their own version of that and demanding that he change everything about the government that they do not like. I think the problem for the media, though, is going to be, and the problem for the government, if that were to be taken up, is the goalposts on that will shift. There is nothing surer under the sun. So the media is not in the business of electing Labor governments. That is not their reason for being. And so he will need to decide with his team, our strategy is whatever he sets it to be, and that is the basis on which we will make decisions about which changes we do proceed with and which ones we resist as not being part of our strategy and not being in the interests of the government and the Labor Party.
Watching the press conference yesterday, the media in the end, and you said this on the show the other week, Lissie, they are not our friends. They don't want Labor governments. They want stories, and they wanted a contest, and they gave as good as they could to make sure they got a contest. They got their contest. The contest is now over, and now Ben Carroll.
Now they move on to the next contest, because the contest now is Ben Carroll versus Jess Wilson and One Nation. Yep. That is now the contest.
Yeah.
I was watching the coverage last night. I think I was so desperate I was watching Channel 9. And there were a couple of journos who I just couldn't name if my life depended on it, on the steps of Parliament House chatting about the day's events. And it was like they were talking about a football game that had just ended. Like they were just utterly into the contest. It was, it's been an interesting day here in sport, and then did you see that hand pass and, the coach. And it was just it's not just entertainment, news is entertainment. It's their entertainment, isn't it? It's their own. I think to Lizzie's substantive point about issues, what we saw Ben Carroll do yesterday is offer up, the interim grid, which is confronting those issues that just ate his predecessor alive and confronting them head on. And there are different thoughts about the wit of doing that. For a long time, the orthodoxy was you talk about your issues, you don't talk about your adversaries' issues. I think we sort of changed that a little bit in the 90s when we confronted Jeff Kennett with issues around leadership and economic management. But and I think, Ben, that Brack's experience will not have been lost on Ben. I mean, he is not going to slide through, the Labor Party is not going to slide through to November not talking about the construction industry, debt and crime. I'm not suggesting any of you think that either, by the way, but we all know that. So he has to confront those issues head on, and those are the things at the heart of the weakened Labor position in Victoria, and they have to be buttressed. So they may not be issues that we will win on, but they are issues where the Labor Party has to demonstrate that it sees them, it understands them, it has a plan to tackle them and improve them for the lives of every Victorian. And there's no alternative but to confront them.
No, I don't.
Made it the construction stuff its raison d'etre. It was determined one way or another to say that its journalism and its masthead had brought down a Labor Premier around the issue of construction corruption, and they did, didn't they? The time is now for Labor to deal with this real issue and to position Ben Carroll as the man who can clean up the mess.
I think, David, the thing I would say to that, though, is you cannot. I think what you've just outlined is what I would and my operation would have referred to as the defensive grid, which are issues that are relevant for which you must have a credible answer and which you seek to neutralise in order to pivot back to your grid on which you are able to win. Because neutralising is not enough to win any contest. You must have something that you are better at than your opponents. Otherwise, why would anyone vote for you? And so I think I don't think there is any question about what the defensive grid for this government is right now. But I think the question that is yet to be answered, that the Premier will go about laying out, whether he terms it this way or not, doesn't really matter. But what is the proactive agenda that this government and this Premier will prosecute and take to the election to say, vote for us for this reason?
But Peter Beattie showed us you can win an election on a defensive grid. Like if the attribute who's best placed to clean up the Labor Party was, ironically enough, the leader of the Labor Party, Peter Beattie, wasn't it? I'm not saying this is the strategy. I don't know what the strategy is. But I'm saying at this early moment, it is possible that your defensive grid turns into a strength.
And I may yet be proven entirely wrong about this. In F case, so be it. But I don't think that the electorate at large is going to be interested enough in cleaning up the Labor Party to think that is something that should inspire them to put a 1 in the box.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know either.
I think they're going to have some other interests around cost of living and healthcare and housing and whatever else they may be.
They do, but gee, they talk about corruption a lot. You know, this corruption narrative just completely got away from us. The $15 billion number from Jeffrey Watson completely got away from us. The idea that the Victorian Labor government was a customer being screwed by a corrupt industry never took hold. Instead, what's taken hold is the idea that somehow the Labor Party turned a blind eye and may have even been a beneficiary to this corruption in the construction industry. The issue has become completely entangled and distorted in the public imagination, and that undoing that will be worth a lot.
Well, we are going to find out over the next 130-odd days how this all transpires.
Fingers and toes crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. And while this was all happening, Maura Demon resigned from the Liberal Party.
Is she going to be the One Nation leader?
Well, Pauline says she doesn't want it because she doesn't want people she can't trust.
I think she's been ruled out of contention for that one.
Like,
oh, right, okay.
You know you're a piece of shit when One Nation doesn't take you.
Yeah, they took Latham. I didn't know they had standards.
Yeah. All right. David Feeney, Lissie Ratcliff, thank you very much for today. Lissie, your face says that you have one more thing to say before we close out.
I do have one more thing that I want to say, if that's okay. I just want to take this opportunity to say to all of the staff who are working in the government right now, I'll be your self-appointed advocate in this particular instance, given I used to be one of you. Yesterday was a really tough day, and it's been a pretty tough couple of days and probably a couple of weeks or months for them as well. When you're a staffer, you don't have any control over what the elected representatives that you work for do in matters like this. You've just got to kind of sit back and wait and hope that they make a decision that is a good one. And sometimes those decisions will be proven over time to be good, and sometimes they'll be proven to be bad, and we won't know. But I do just want to say to all the staff, particularly those people in the Premier's office and in other offices who, as a result of the last couple of days, are going to be hurting quite badly in some cases. Some of them will lose their jobs. Some of them will decide that this is the last contribution they're going to make to the Labor movement for at least the time being. The events of the last couple of days do not in any way take away from how hard you worked and how much that mattered and the impact that you've had both on the government but also on the people of Victoria in the projects and the programs and the services that you have helped to deliver. And all of that mattered last week, all of it matters this week, and all of it will continue to matter long into the future. So From one former staffer to all the current ones, thank you for your efforts and for your loyalty to the people that you serve. It is no small thing, and it is often, I think, unrecognised. So in this instance, at least, let it be recognised here on Socially Democratic.
Here, well said.
Lissie Ratcliff, forever the Chief of Staff.
Well, it's a terrible thing, isn't it, that like behind all of this, there will be a cohort of staffers for whom this is an exciting time of opportunity, and there'll be another cohort of staffers who, are facing great uncertainty and great pain. It's an unsung story, so well done for singing it.
Yeah, and to all the people who are going to step into big jobs and bigger jobs than they had yesterday, genuinely, I wish all of you well as well. It is
get it right. No pressure. Just everybody depends on it.
No pressure. It will be a very hard thing to do, but it is a privilege to serve as a staffer in a Labor government. So I wish all of you the very best as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I'd love to end the show on a high note. So good job by you two. Thanks very much for your time today. I appreciate you jumping on at a very short notice. And obviously we'll resume normal programming for Socially Democratic this week by dropping our episode that David and Jesse and I recorded this Friday. And we'll talk to you all soon. Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.